Hi, my name is Aaron Linsdau. I'm a polar explorer and motivational speaker. Today I'm with a couple of America's famous most explorers, Lewis or Clark, Sacagawea, and we're going to talk about the Lewis and Clark Memorial in Clarkston, Washington. The Lewis and Clark Memorial in Clarkston, Washington is totally cool to stop at. I'm going to reel in my cord here. We've got the Sacagawea, or some pronounce it Sacagawea. I'll call it Sacagawea. You can deal with it if you don't like that. And then I think that's Lewis, Meriwether Lewis. And there is an entire walkway dedicated to the Lewis and Clark expedition over in Clarkston. It was dedicated in 1997. But what I'm going to do is haul you along here and talk about some of the information. Now, the Lewis and Clark expedition, hopefully you know it from school. Do they still teach that in school? I hope so. That was probably one of the greatest expeditions across America ever, because they traveled 3,555 miles from somewhere in St. Louis or near Pittsburgh originally, all the way up the rivers and then all the way back. And you're wondering why I walk all the way back up and down, because it's kind of interesting. Hopefully my microphone's doing pretty well here, but we'll find out. So what I'm going to do is show you some of the drawings that were enshrined in concrete on the walkway here. It's actually pretty interesting, and talk about the experience of the Lewis and Clark expedition. Now, why was that important? Because way back when, and President Thomas Jefferson was instrumental in buying the Louisiana Purchase. And when the Louisiana Purchase was made, let's see, purchase signing, here we are. So I gotta mess with my tripod a bit, and then we'll do this. But Louisiana Purchase, taken care of 1803, April 13th, by Robert Livingston, James Monroe, from CM Talleyrand in France. So the Louisiana Purchase was made for a mere 15 million bucks, which 15 million bucks can't even buy you a jet anymore, hardly. Maybe a small private use jet. That bought a quarter of the United States, something like that. So President Jefferson decided, hey, you know what? We bought this land. We have no clue what's out there. They've heard incidental stories from fur trappers and native Indians, but no clue, like, well, what's there? So what does he do? When you got all this land, you commission an expedition. And thus was born the Lewis and Clark expedition. So Lewis and Clark were commissioned to travel all the way across America in order to find out what the heck was out there. So this interesting, and so what I'm going to do is just travel you along this concrete walkway and talk about a couple of the points. It's really pretty fascinating. If you don't know this history, I mean, it was epic. 3,500 miles. My expedition was 700 miles on foot. I wasn't shot at by Indians. I wasn't attacked by grizzlies. I was frozen. I got sick, but I wasn't shot at, and nothing tried to kill me except for the weather, so not too bad. So here we go. So we're gonna go with the Falls of Cincinnati with the Great Lakes here. Right out of Lewis, they go to the Mississippi River. Sergeant Floyd dies. Teton Sioux confronted the Mandan people. This is where the expeditions actually split up near the Yellowstone River. How in the world they found each other a gazillion miles later, I don't have a clue. Salt Lake. So we're kind of flying over the western U.S. now. Lolo Pass, and we are here at the confluence of the rivers in Clarkston. Canoe Camp. And you've got Salt Lake, Tahoe, Pacific Ocean. So normally we look at this map like this. This is actually, so from the East Coast over there, across to the Great Lakes, the Midwest, the West, and finally Pacific Ocean. That's the distance that they traveled. That is insane. And they tried to go up rivers as much as possible. So that was a critical thing till they got to the Rockies, and then they suffered like all the rest of us. So on the 20th of June, 1803, President Jefferson wrote the proclamation. He gave instructions to Lewis, and they bought this expedition for $2,500. Now think about that, people. What does 2,500 bucks buy you today? You could buy a lot of Starbucks for that still, but you can't buy like almost a cruddy used car for 2,500 bucks. Maybe, but probably not. You wouldn't want a $2,500 car. So imagine supplying an expedition for 2,500 bucks. I mean, that's crazy. Yeah, I mean, my expedition to Denali probably cost me 2,500 bucks, and that's just a couple of weeks, let alone going across the country for a couple of years. Inflation, people, inflation. So, Harper's Ferry is where Lewis picked up all the equipment, and they have the listing of all the different things that they needed. I mean, guns, the arms and ammo is $374. You can't buy a decent AR. Can you buy one for 370 bucks? I don't know. You probably wouldn't want a $370 AR. So they had rifles back then that were the equivalent AR. But yeah, it's the price increase, of course, in 250 years is pretty dramatic. And the keel boat that they built. Now, as I'm showing you these things, these drawings are actually from Lewis and Clark's actual journal. So that's pretty cool, and they can get the idea. It looks like a slave boat, but that's actually their boat. And they begin their 1,100-mile trek down the Ohio River to the Mississippi. And then the core of Discovery, the major jumping off point, leaves St. Louis at 0 miles. So St. Louis was like kind of like the frontier in the 14th of May, 1804. It was out there. To us, I mean, that's the Midwest. I mean, it's got the St. Louis Arch and everything, but back then, that was a big deal. So they go 600 miles, get to the Platte River, and they get to Iowa at 650 miles, corn country in America. And they've got these gifts that they gave to the native Indians here. Way back when, things were a little more positive-ish. And that's a sketch of Jefferson. And then they had some deserters, Charbonneau, Sacagawea, they meet, and Sacagawea gives birth to a son. And there we get to 1805. So already the expedition's cruising along. And this is, of course, in concrete. This is a recreation of the drawings, obviously, in Lewis and Clark's journals, because they didn't write in concrete, duh. But these are very good representations of the drawings they had. And so that is the drawing of Sacagawea way back when. So as the expedition goes up and meets the Mandan Indians and finally reaches the mouth of the Yellowstone all the way at April 26th from, like, where'd they start? Sorry. 14th of May, 1804. 1805. So, like, in April. So it took almost a year to go from St. Louis to Yellowstone, what now National Park, and they found their first bighorn sheep. Now this thing's pretty crazy. Check that out, and that is the drawing that he had in their expedition journals. Clark names Judith River, honor of his future wife. They run into a bunch of wolves. Wolves are not very friendly back then. And then they saw the grizzly. Yep, you don't want to see grizzly. You do want to see grizzly, but not like in an aggressive manner. They're a spectacular animal, seen them plenty of times. But boy, you run into them out there, they'll just charge you and eat you, they'll kill you. They were able to kill that grizzly, and it was 8 foot 7 inches, nose to skin feet. Whoa, boy. And so those 6 men ended up being attacked by that grizzly, and they had to jump down a 20-foot bank. They do some other things here. We're at 2,200 miles, Great Falls, Montana. They could hear the roar of Great Falls 7 miles away. And here's the Kentucky rifle that Clark carried. It was specially designed by Lewis, and it's extra long. I think these things are like 6 feet long. Yeah, Kentucky rifle is absurdly long. I'll have to look up the info on that. Maybe you should. That'd be a good homework assignment. But the rifles, because these rifles weren't rifled. They hadn't figured out how to rifle by putting this little spirals inside the barrel to make the bullet spin and stabilize it. So they were just shooting ball ammo, which just shoots about like 100 yards, and that ball's all floating around. So the idea of that longer rifle is it allowed you better aim, and it flattened out the trajectory of the ball a bit. Not effective until rifling came along, but boy, that was the Kentucky rifle, super effective. Alrighty, then we march on. They go to Great Falls, to Missouri, and they said the portage of their boats was pretty dang miserable, and I can't blame them. I portaged a canoe a mile and I hated it. So they of course named things like Jefferson, Madison, Gallatin, who are all characters in the Revolution. And then Clark goes into the River of No Return. And the River of No Return is part of the River of No Return wilderness in the middle of Idaho. It's some pretty hardcore land. I'd like to go do an expedition there. Of course, you might not return. Ooh. So Lolo Pass, you can actually drive from Lolo Pass going from Idaho into Montana. It's pretty steep, it gets snowy, and not very enjoyable there. Oh, here we go. So they made out a canoe. So they had to build 5 canoes in 10 days, and that doesn't sound like a big deal until you realize you gotta chop a tree down, use some axes, chop that thing out, not break the canoe, and succeed. And here we are on 10th of October, like I think we're still in 1806. They make it to Lewiston, Idaho on the Clearwater River, where I'm standing now. Well, actually I'm Clarkston, but now. 2,988 miles, crazy. And then they finally find large salmon, and that is their sketch by Clark of the first salmon that they found. Obviously, people knew what salmon were in the natives, but the Westerners didn't know. Actually, they're Easterners. There you go. So we're gonna march along. Okay, now my drawing's pretty bad, but he could have drawn a better picture of the vulture, but hey, you know, he's been on the road a year and a half. Fort Ketchup, one of their forts, 1806, boom! All winter, 12 days without rain. Moccasins, they met the, oops, oh crud. Where are we? Am I lost? Oh no. Oops, sorry, fail. Oh crud. Canoe, August, Lewiston, salmon, Portland. Try not to make a mistake here, sorry. Oh, they finally made Oregon, yeah. 3,550 miles. Crazy. And a picture of their fort. That's nuts. Now, of course, you get to the Pacific Ocean, and now you gotta like get back, because after you've done this expedition, you don't want to die in the West. You gotta bring all that information back east. Whew, pretty crazy. So interestingly, if you've ever heard of the Flathead Indian tribe, so what the Flathead Indian did is apparently it was pretty sexy to them, and no offense to Flathead Indians now, but they would literally put people under a press and smash their heads and flatten their heads out. Kind of trippy. So back in 1806, they had to start and like, well, we gotta get back, son. So I'll kick it up a bit. So here the Heathcock from the plains. They get back to the Snake River at Lewiston, Clarkston. Lewiston and Clarkston from the Lewis and Clark expedition. Yep. This is called an air gun. I don't know exactly how this works, but it's pretty interesting. And Clark had a compass. If ever you go out and you don't have a compass, you're like gonna die. They end up killing a Blackfoot Indian, which of course causes them huge amounts of trouble. And invariably, Lewis got shot in the butt by one of his own guys. Fortunately, he survived. And then they got to Pompey's Tower in Montana, and they scratched their name in there. Probably not much of that left. Sacagawea leave the Corps, and they were paid $500. And then they get back to St. Louis on the 23rd of September, I think it was 1806. And then all of their equipment was auctioned off for $400. What can you buy for $400? You can buy like an OK HD TV for $400. Think one of the greatest expeditions in American history, and it was all sold for $400. What does Lewis look like? There you go. That's a hand-drawing watercolor of Meriwether Lewis. And so they make a memorial to him on the Natchez Trace If you've never been on the Natchez Trace in Mississippi, that's cool. I wish I would have done a video back then, but maybe if I get there, I'll do it again. And then, let's see, who died? Superintendent of Indian Affairs, William Clark. He died June 27th, 1820. Born 9 months before Lewis's death. And then Harriet Radford, the wife, survived. And then we've finally got this Memorial Day incision that says, Lewis and Clark, veterans, other patriotic citizens damaged their bodies and gave their lives for our nation and mankind. Do you, in this spirit, leave a responsibility? Why do we find or see greed? Ask not what your nation do for you. Ask what you can do for your nation. Mankind, in this very way, you will protect, preserve, and serve. AD 1839, 1865, 1907 Memorial Day. I wonder if JFK actually got his original lines from somebody. So, I am in Clarkston, at the very east edge of Clarkston. There's the highway, there's a golf course right there. If you want to check out this very cool location to learn, about the Lewis and Clark expedition, this is the place to come. You actually get to walk a little bit and experience a microscopic piece of that distance that the Lewis and Clark expedition made. I mean, getting to the east or to the west in 1806 and going back and surviving, having almost nobody killed, that is freaking crazy. It's awesome. So even though I'm a explorer and I've done some expeditions, nothing compared to the scale of Lewis and Clark and their expedition. And I had to commend those men, those men and the one woman who did that, because beyond epic, it really defined America and made a huge difference in our lives, and we don't even know it now. Thank you very much, Lewis and Clark, Sacagawea, and President Jefferson. My name is Aaron Linsdau. I am a polar explorer and motivational speaker. I have hoped to have inspired you with a tiny bit of this experience. Please like and comment on the video, subscribe to my channel, support me on Venmo, Patreon, and PayPal. Yeah, PayPal, so I can keep bringing you these experiences. Enjoy and be inspired to go into the world beyond your doorstep and the world beyond your city limits.